We're really excited to have Professor James Banks joining our course. Professor James Banks is one of the leading experts in the world on multiculturalism, having published many books on the subject, and is a leading light in the field. So first of all, thank you so much, Professor Banks, for being with us. Can you tell us how you got into the area of multiculturalism?
Well, I got in the field because it was very personal. I grew up in the segregated South in the 50s and 60s, and it was really highly segregated, and where blacks went to black schools and whites went to white schools, and that was discrimination. So I became involved for very personal reasons, because I saw many black youngsters as bright as me who dropped out of school and didn't make it. So I developed a commitment to first starting with black students. My first work was on African Americans. And so when I became a fifth grade teacher, and then after that I wrote, my first book was March Toward Freedom, A History of Black Americans. It was a book for junior high school students. And then my next book was Teaching the Black Experience. But to make a long story short, I began to meet other scholars when I went to the University of Washington from other ethnic groups, and I began to realize that blacks weren't the only group that was discriminated against, but that other groups were too. All of these groups had a profound effect on my view of the world, and I began to see diversity and racism as going across groups. So my work then expanded from black studies to ethnic studies, and then later on to multi-ethnic education and to multiculturalism.
So Professor Banks, can you tell me about your own personal identity?
Well, my personal identity, as I said in the question, was really strongly influenced by growing up in an apartheid segregated society, and so that your personal identity was heavily influenced by the social, what one scholar called the caste system of the South. And so that your identity became really strongly constructed by your immersion in black institutions. The black church was very significant. Black teachers who taught us about black heroes such as Booker T. Washington, W.B. Du Bois. And so the identity, and that identity became primary. The black in America became my primary identity because of the strong cultural institutions, and because of we were segregated. When we went to the theater, that was a black movie house, but when we went to the white movie house, we had to sit upstairs and hear the projector running.
Does your personal identity change over time?
I think your identity expands and becomes fluid and contextual. Of course, when I became, when I'm lecturing at the University of Washington on social studies education, which I was hired for, my identity in that context is primarily a social studies educator. And even though I carry my black identity, my primary identity in my role, I was hired not to teach ethnic studies, by the way. I was hired to, there was no such opening. I was hired to teach social studies education. And so my identity, the primary identity in that context was a social studies educator. And so I think identity is fluid, contextual, and complex.